Hey, what's up? This is Joshua, MVA Studio. It's a little breezy right now, but don't worry, this is not a wind damaged video. It's actually recorded in the safe confines of a classroom at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Okay, it did just get windy, but still, the video won't be. A couple weeks ago, I put out, I think, 2 videos that were about kind of like my first and second iron laws of the design process. This video will be a little bit redundant because it's from a workshop that I taught 2 weeks ago, and it covers those same topics, but in listening to it, I just felt like I really got it and it was worth sharing again. There's something that happens once I'm in teaching mode. I tend to be a little bit more on than when I record one of these videos. It's very often at the end of the day and I'm beat, or at the very beginning of the day, maybe my brain hasn't totally woken up. So I think this video is really good for explaining how I think the design process works, and hopefully explaining some of the issues that you might be running into when you're designing stuff, whether it's doubt, creative block, mistakes that turn up during the process, so on and so forth. You'll see in the background of it, there is a deck being presented. At some point, I'm going to consolidate that deck and have it for download at the MVA.com, but right now that is not happening because it's like 100-something page deck that was intended for more of a live, workshop-y, performative type thing, and it really needs to be like a nice tight 40. So I hope that you dig this and it makes sense. Hit me up if you have any questions about any of the content. I have 2 theories about how the design process works, and kind of everything I do is based off those theories, and like that's how I understand the design process, and that's how I understand it when it works successfully. And when it doesn't work, then I assume that these 2 theories, like, they're more like rules and they get broken. So my first rule of design is the design process should resemble a funnel. So what I mean by that is you have lots of stuff at the top and sort of like a single thing at the bottom. The way that I see it is, at the very beginning, you're putting all these inputs in the form of research. And it's lots of little tiny things, but it's this volume of stuff that you're looking at. So you're reading, you're talking, you're interviewing, you're listening, you're watching, you're taking in all of this stuff. One of those things, or a couple of those things, bounce through that funnel, through the design process, through client presentations, through that execution, whatever, and it comes out the bottom, and it's almost like this perfectly round little beach stone. Like, the tumultuous process shapes it into something, but it comes from something way up at the top. And I think that things that would appear not to look like that actually do. If you work in-house at a brand, you have one idea at the beginning of the project, and that thing gets all the way through to the end. It's because I think the funnel happened before you hopped on it, and that, like, because the brand existed and because there's forward movement already, it's more like you just showed up kind of in the middle. But that when you get into creating a brand, or anything you have to do like original creation from scratch, you're going to end up with something that looks like that. The second one, all things being equal, each phase of the design process should be easier and take less time than the previous stage. So as it's going along, the project should get easier and easier. Essentially up to the first client presentation is my belief. Actually past the first client presentation. That as it forms, it should be getting easier and it should be going faster and faster. Now some things can't go faster. Like, you might have a concept for something and the physical execution of it requires many hours of programming or fabrication or drawing or something like that. But all things being equal, if you didn't have to actually put in that labor, that would be the easiest thing. Now, I'm guessing that most people, that's not your experience of design. That a more accurate depiction, not all the time, but enough of the time is projects get kicked off. Maybe you get really excited during the kickoff and you actually don't touch the project for like 3 or 4 days because you're so excited that you don't actually have to work on it. And maybe driving back from the meeting that kicked it off, you got like this idea and you're like, oh, that's what I'm gonna do. And you just you procrastinate a little bit. Not because you're scared of it, just because you're like, I got it in the bag. It's like in my head, it's totally gonna work. And you finally sit down and work on it and it's not quite going the way you want it to. And the more you work on it, you have this like InDesign document with 17 pages. None of them are quite doing what you want them to do. They're probably good, but because there's this thing in your head, they're not doing what you want them to do. So you work on that for a while. Maybe you waste a lot of time going down this road. So then you think like, okay, you know what? I need some inspiration. So you go and get some inspiration, whether that's on the internet, or you go for a walk, or you decide to take what you do have and go talk to some people. Maybe those people give you super good feedback, but for some reason you can't like execute on it. Like you know that you could finish the thing, but you're not finishing it. And then you're freaking out now, because like now the deadline is looming and you don't really have anything to show for your work other than the 17 versions that you're not really stoked on. So then you're like, you know what, I should do some research. That's what I should do. You're doing the research, but the whole time you're stressed out, which makes it really difficult to do the research. And then you like find something, you're like, oh cool, I found an idea. Let's sketch that out. And you like sketch it, and then you go to make the thing, and that's also not clicking. And then like the 11th hour, you do one of a couple things. You just decide to polish up something from the 17 versions and pretend like you like them. Maybe you get super inspired by something and you're like, well, if I did something like that and I just changed the fonts and the colors, that'll be all right. That'll be different enough. Or maybe you actually have a legit idea. Like it comes to you at the last minute and like it comes together amazingly. What would often happen for me is I'd work on something for a day, show it to my wife who I work with, and then she'd go, oh, why is it so complicated? Photo, big type, call it a day. And she'd always be right, and that's always what the client would pick. In that process, as it goes on, nothing gets easier. Every single thing gets harder because you run out of time, and the pieces don't fit together in any way, shape, or form. You work on the 17 versions, but there's 17 versions of one idea that's not clicking. So you can't make any kind of forward movement on that. And then the research is a smart move, but it's so late in the process that every minute you spend on it is a minute you're closer to that deadline with nothing working out. So in that process, it gets harder and harder, or at least stays roughly the same. And when you finally hit the thing that maybe you can finish, you realize like, this could be so much better if I was at this stage a week ago. Has anybody had that experience? I would be shocked if anyone hasn't had it, I'm so envious of you because you're doing things right. That's a pretty typical model. That's why people say stuff like, oh, design is mysterious and it's hard and you never know like where the idea is gonna come from, and take a shower and then write down your dreams and all that stuff. But in that process, it's hard and stressful from start to finish. So what I wanna propose is, I'm gonna make a little diagram. For things to get easier as the project goes on, it requires them to flow into each other and to build off of each other. So, if I want the execution of this thing to be easy, it's going to require an approval at a reasonable time, right? Because like everybody has the thing where the client doesn't approve it, but they don't give you more time. It just gets squished and squished and squished. So you have your execution phase. I define the execution as like once the concept is picked, it's just everything else that happens from there to the end of the project. So we have execution. That'll be our end point, I guess. So for that to be easy, we probably need the client presentation to be easy. So, we show them a deck. We want this deck to be like the easiest thing that we've ever made. What does that require? It's going to require really good comps. Because like the deck is only easy to make if you already have good stuff in motion. If the deck is hard to make, it's because you're playing presentation theater, trying to mask that this stuff is not as good as you think it is. So that's when we start using fancy language. To have good comps, and I basically define comp as like whatever it is you show the client in round one is the comp. So comps, to have good comps, we need good sketches. So like, get the best sketches, and we turn those into comps. To wind up with good sketches, we need good concepts, things that we're gonna turn into a sketch. To have good concepts, we need good insights into what it is that we're talking about. To have good insights requires us to have a good analysis of the research. And to have good analysis requires good research. So the other thing I'm saying is not only should this get easier and easier and easier, technical hurdles notwithstanding, I'm also saying it should go faster and faster. Like once you get to a certain point, you should just be able to kind of plow through it really easily. So let's paint Fantasyland. If we were doing a poster, let's say we're designing a poster, and we want to do 3 versions for the client presentation, how long, just a couple volunteers, how long do you think it would take you to do 3 versions? And we're talking about the actual, what you consider design. So some of us like don't really do research unless this part isn't coming together. So you might be like, oh, well, it would take me 24 hours. Somebody else would be like, well, I actually do all this other stuff, so the actual comps would be 8 hours. Some wild guesses on how long it would take you to get 3 posters ready for a client presentation.
It's like 8 hours.
Okay, so we got an 8-hour one. Anybody else? I know for me, I would say it would take, pre-2012, it would take me 20 hours. No, that's too much. No, 2.5 days. That's probably what it would take. 8 is much more reasonable place to be. But I would spend 12 of those hours wasting my time on the first idea that's not clicking. Then I'd be like, well, once I go to bed and wake up tomorrow, I'll suddenly make it work. Anybody else? Anybody more than 20 hours? Anybody less than 8 hours? It's like 2 days. Seem reasonable to most people? Okay. So by that logic, if we're going to spend more time sketching than doing comps, let's take it at 8, because that's a reasonable one. Let's say for sketches, spend 12 hours. That would mean that to come up with concepts, we'd spend like maybe, I don't know, 16, which is already more time than you ever get to do anything, I'm guessing. To develop those insights, 20. Our analysis, 24. So our research is at 28 hours. Almost a full week to research. Has anyone ever had that? No, of course not. So this is where we get into the importance of what we're going to do here. We have to figure out how to work faster, period. To me, the main reason to figure out how to work faster, there's 2. The first one is, when you get to here, if you've spent 8 hours on your 3 comps and they reject them, you don't really care, because that's about 2.5 hours each. It's very hard to feel bad about something that you only spent 2.5 hours on getting rejected. If you do, as I used to do, and spend 20 hours on 2 versions, and bear in mind that that didn't include whatever I did before here, the coming up with ideas, the driving around, talking them out, all that stuff. If they reject the 20 hours, it's not their fault. I don't fault them for it, but I'm super mad and irritated because it's not like they're gonna go, you know what? Nice effort. How long did you spend on it? And we do it 20 hours. Okay, cool. The project is due 20 hours later than it was originally due. They're not gonna do that, right? They're gonna wanna see the next set of them almost immediately. So one of the benefits to working fast is you can show more stuff
earlier, but you're also less attached to it, which makes it easier when they do kill stuff. Does that make sense to everybody? So like I used to make the masterpiece. Like it was done when I showed it to the client. So if they wanted to change anything, I had to take a deep breath, explain why it was the way it was, see if I could just get them to see it my way, and then if they couldn't, I'd go, cool, we can make it purple and yellow. But I was super hung up and attached to it because I loved this thing. I like slaved over it and slept and thought about it. So even if it was 20 hours, it was probably 20 hours as part of a week where I was like, thinking about it the whole time. So that's one part of it. The other thing is, to make this easy, we have to be able to start doing actual research and analysis and ideation. And not in the way that where you do just enough research to have an idea and then you jump on a computer or Sketch or whatever. I'm talking about like where you just define like I have 16 hours to do research before I have to do anything else with the research. The only way to do that is to figure out how to work faster. Working faster will free you up to work smarter and make better work. Okay, so just to formalize it, as I see it, if you're doing traditional graphic design work where you have to come up with a concept and the visuals are a representation of that concept, you're doing this even if you don't know that you're doing it. You might be doing the research, analysis, insight, and concepting all at once. You read a paragraph of something and then you see a clue in it and then you come up with a concept on the spot. And then you're doing the sketching in your head. Like you're like, okay, well what if I did this? And you think about it, and then you make a comp, or perhaps you do what I used to do, you were making an execution for the very first client presentation. But this stuff is always there, and if you try to not have it there, you have what is known as creative block. Because you're skipping 1, 2, 3, and 4, or you're skipping 1, but trying to get to 3. Any of that kind of stuff, that's like the recipe for creative block. Yeah, the most critical stage of a project is the time between the kickoff and the first client presentation. Now, the one thing I will say is, if you just take that idea of that sequence of steps and the funnel thing, you could probably sleep through the rest of this because that will change your work. I guarantee if you were struggling with creative block, that sequence of stuff is messed up, and that you're not going from a ton to few, you're probably going few to few. Or you're doing a thing where you do just enough research to have an idea, you have just enough ideas to make a sketch, you have just enough sketches to make a comp, and you have just enough comps to show something to the client. So 3 days before it's due, you might think you're gonna end up with 3 or 4 versions, but because you only have so much to slough off, because it's always just enough, you end up with 1, maybe 2. If you imagine that sequence as a gigantic funnel, where you have a ton of research, which therefore gives you a ton of stuff to analyze, which then gives you the opportunity to have a ton of insights, because that's where your concepts come from. It comes from that insight of like, oh, what if I did this? Or what if this meant this? And that's how we executed it. And then you'd be able to do a ton of concepts. Each step, you would take the best stuff and move it forward instead of, and you'd have a lot of it. So if you were shooting to get to that client presentation with 10 concepts, that by definition would mean your research needs to be pretty intense. So you take those 2 things, that will change your work quite a bit. If your creative block is the result of being insecure, that's not gonna help.